Welcome into HogvilleNET YouTube Live. It's Friday afternoon. I think we've had to hit a couple of these. We had Darius Acuff Jr., the national top five rated five-star commit to Arkansas. What was it, a couple of weeks ago or so? That came on a Friday. And then today we found out a couple of things about some other five-star prospects that Arkansas that I've written a lot about, I've talked about during these segments. Thank you again for joining me. By the way, go hit subscribe, like, share, those things that help us out. But two pieces of news today, I think the most significant right now, if you've listened to me talk beyond Acuff Jr. in terms of what I think, where I think Arkansas stands with a couple of combo forward type players, both of them national five or top 10 rated five stars. It's been a lot of talk about Caleb Wilson and Koa Peat with some intel that you really can't get elsewhere. And so we've talked a lot about with Caleb Wilson, what he told me when I interviewed him, Koa Pete, what he told me when I interviewed him, but also some source information. And one of the main talking points with Koa Pete, who today, by the way, his list of initial visits coming out, Arkansas for the weekend of September 14th. That's a Saturday. Arkansas hosts Alabama, Birmingham in football that day. So your school's back in, your football season's going. Be the third game for the Razorbacks before they actually host a game in Fayetteville. That's the first opportunity for any visitor to come in and see what the fan atmosphere is like. But Koa Pete's going to take a visit to Arkansas. Then later it'll be Baylor. He's also got the home state school, Arizona. We're going to talk a little bit about this. And then also there's discussion that he's going to maybe set something up with Duke earlier in September. So right now, the visits that are scheduled, Arkansas would be the first of three. Duke could actually be scheduled potentially prior to that. And then you've got the other home state school, Arizona State, likely to get a visit at some point. Okay, there were other schools amongst his top nine. When you looked at North Carolina, some others in there. But it looks like right now at least three visits are set for Koa Pete. And this is a guy that I've repeatedly said, I've given you two pieces of source information multiple times. I'm going to repeat some of that stuff and then talk more about that visit weekend. But Pete, 6'8" combo forward again from Gilbert, Arizona, plays for Arizona Compass, plays for 17U Compton Magic, was a force on the Adidas 3SSB circuit over the spring and summer, averaged just over 23 points and nearly 7.5 rebounds a game, nearly 3 assists and a couple of steals per outing. So he does a little bit of everything. I've seen this young man play up close and personal multiple times going back to the spring. I think it was maybe March after his 8th grade year when he came to Little Rock for Real Deal in the Rock. So been watching him play at the various Adidas circuit events for years. Had a nice interview with him back in May when he told me Calipari, there was already a relationship there and that he very much wanted to visit Arkansas. And it's just kind of ramped up this. The source information I've shared with you is that Arkansas would not only get a visit, but was up there near or at the top of his list. Then I had another source just reminding folks what I've said is that at the end of the day, this second source believes that he may stay close to home for college in the end. And so when it's John Calipari and now you've got a visit set up, I like Arkansas's chances. I'm not saying that Arkansas is a front runner by any stretch. Staying close to home, he's already got a visit set up with Arizona, potentially one Arizona State, but the Wildcats have been, kind of the team to beat maybe in some people's eyes. I still think anytime you give Calipari, get to a point where Calipari goes beyond an offer but is setting up visits, you've got to like his chances to land the player. So I'm not saying that in my mind makes Arkansas the favorite. What I am saying is, despite talk about him staying close to home, which may very well be what he does, he once he makes that trip to Arkansas, that could be a change. That could change things, especially when he's because he's been in Arkansas before. I mentioned that he's been in Little Rock when I interviewed him like 3 or so years ago when he first came down. It wasn't his first time in the state, but he was a guy that has always demonstrated some level of interest in Arkansas. And then when Calipari came on board, that raised the level of his interest. I'll put it that way. And then I think the proof's kind of in the pudding. He's got of the final 9 schools so far, we've only learned of now 3 visits. Again, Arkansas, Baylor, and Arizona. Duke and Arizona State were also among his top 9. There's also talk about those 2 teams getting visits scheduled. People go back and forth on, do you want the first visit? Do you want the last visit? there's also been, discussion that he may wait until the spring. But now that we're seeing a list of visits that have come out, that being in the fall, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to sign early. But he's not stretching these visits out to basketball season, meaning if he did that, college basketball season starts in November. The early signing period begins in the first week, trending toward the middle of November, and it's only a week long. So maybe there's a potential for him to get his visits out of the way earlier in the fall during football season. I do have a little bit of intel only that, and it may seem obvious at this point on part of this, but the other part may not be. But during that September 14th is that Saturday. So the 13th is Friday, the 15th Sunday. My guess is he arrives sometime on Friday. But I'm told not only will he attend the football game, and he'll be attending an Arkansas practice for basketball that weekend. Some of that stuff may seem obvious, but he may not be alone. And that's the key point. I've got sources that are telling me that Arkansas could have a multiple visitor weekend that weekend. It's the only game in September that Arkansas hosts a football Fayetteville. There'll be other opportunities in October, a couple of weekends, I think, in October. And so we may see other guys come in and visit later. I'm not so sure that Calipari will host more than just Koa Peat that weekend, but I've heard from a couple of people that at least two other prospects are eyeballing that September weekend for visits. And that's part of the discussion. If you remember, I've given you, some information a few weeks back about Malik Thomas looking at September and October dates. Well, to visit Arkansas, those would again likely be during a football game weekend, and the only one in September going back to it's Arkansas, Alabama, Birmingham on that September 14th date. Jasper Johnson has Arkansas in his final five. He's looking at fall visit dates as well. The more I look at that situation, the more I really wonder, with Darius Acup Jr. on board, would there really be a 1-2 for Arkansas there in terms of adding a Jasper Johnson? Malik Thomas, not as much of a stretch, in my opinion, in terms of how they would maybe fit together. But Malik Thomas is also thought to be a very heavy UConn lean, although he didn't commit to UConn after that late June visit and is now talking about taking other visits, including Arkansas, among other schools. The 6'4", and every name I'm mentioning right now are five-star guys. Somebody has each of these guys ranked in their top 10. Koa Peat has recently was a top 5 rated 5-star. Darius Acup Jr., according to 247 Sports, who's committed to Arkansas, 6'3" guard out of Detroit, 4th ranked by 247 Sports, so a 5-star. Malik Thomas, top 10, sometimes hovering around the top 5. Jasper Johnson, I think he's 10th or 11th in one or two different polls, also a 5-star. And so when we go back now to this visit news with Koa Peat, let's not forget that Arkansas is also in at 6'8". There are some qualities about him as a combo forward. To me, he's more of a 4, and there's more of a Corliss Williamson sort of, physical, does most of his work around the basket, really does a great job of posting up, sealing guys off, and getting to finishing angles. But in this era of basketball that's unlike Corliss's, guys that can play like that with that size are stretching the floor more and more. You see the ability to knock down mid-range, sometimes three-point shots. Koa Peat has expanded his game. Is he too similar to a Caleb Wilson, who I've mentioned multiple times? If a decision had to be made now, Caleb Wilson, I think, would be a Razorback. I think Arkansas is the front runner there, and I've mentioned in previous segments a bunch of them, several of them, that he's been talking with Darius Acup Jr. about playing together in college. He's been telling me Arkansas is definitely getting a visit in the fall during a football weekend, something we've talked about. So we haven't seen any dates. He recently put out his top 12. Caleb Wilson, also a top 5 rated 5-star, the 6'9" combo forward out of Atlanta. But we haven't seen a specific date for him, but another one where could he be someone that's brought in the same weekend as Koa Peat? I doubt that. But again, a couple of sources have told me that Arkansas is looking at multiple players for that September 14th weekend. That doesn't mean it's going to play out that way. It may be that now that Koa Peat has ironed out a visit date, that maybe it's a situation where Arkansas was entertaining the idea of having different guys, the first one to be on board for a visit, then they move others to other dates. Or do they bring multiple guys in? That's what I don't know. It's a little bit of intel for you. And I think it's great now that some of these visits, because remember, July was a dead period for visits. Coaches were out on the road evaluating at various shoe circuit events. Then August started out the first 5 days, the first, the fifth, you could take visits, a quiet period. Players can come on campus. Now we're in a two peak since the day after the fifth, the sixth, this week began another dead period. So it's dead for the next 2 weeks through the 20th. And then Arkansas or any other school, Division One school, can then again host players beginning August 21st to the 31st. But what we're hearing right now, and it makes sense to me, are that players are setting up visits in the fall because it is a more wholesome visit when you're talking about students being back, the ability to go to football games, seeing what fan atmosphere is like, especially for basketball players. If you want to sign early or get some of your visits out of the way, that's your only chance to kind of get an idea of what the fan atmosphere is like on any campus, is going to a college football game day. And so this is what we're probably going to see with some of these higher level guys. We may see some that stretch out into basketball season. There'll be players that will take it out to the spring. Again, Koa Peat has talked about maybe taking things out to the spring. But again, it might be a little bit hopeful for teams that he's getting visits done in September and October. It leaves open the door that maybe he just decides on where he wants to play and gets it done early. I don't think there's been anything definitive on that. However, it is something that's been talked about from his camp. And remember, I've got two sources close to his camp. One again that said Arkansas is going to be in it down to the wire and in the thick of it, not just as a, sort of on the outside looking in kind of thing. There was that. And then the other source says, look, I think Arkansas and Calipari doing a great job there. He's definitely going to visit, but I think in the end he just may stay close to home. All right, so two different thought processes there. They're similar, but one went a little further on what they think will end up happening. We'll see. Again, this is not something I've just brought up today. If you go back and watch our most recent segments, it's the same talking point. Caleb Wilson, I would say Arkansas may be in better shape with based on where things stand now. We don't have a set visit date for him. Again, Arkansas's in that final 12. There's some talk that he may visit Alabama and North Carolina. Arkansas is one of the 5 schools he told me he would definitely visit in the fall, along with Duke, Oregon, Tennessee, so an SEC foe, and then Georgia Tech, which is the hometown school in Atlanta. Are Koa Pete and Caleb Wilson too similar position-wise to feel comfortable that both guys would maybe get on board with Calipari? Maybe. That may be part of it. They may be keeping an eye on what's to come with the other guy. But with Koa Peat now establishing a visit date, it wouldn't surprise me once we start seeing some visits that if there are any other visitors on that weekend, that it wouldn't be Caleb Wilson, maybe a guard or somebody else if it happens, and maybe Caleb Wilson sometime in October, because again, Arkansas doesn't have another home football game in September outside of that UAB game on September 14th. But speaking of releasing a top 12, that's what Cen Jr. did today, the 6'10" forward center, who was he was a force on the Next Pro 16 Puma circuit. That's really a rising circuit. It's still outside the top 3 Nike, Adidas, and Under Armour Association, but it's had some really good players the last two years. Asa Newell, last year a 5-star, and then this year one of the 5 stars, Cen Jr. Now he was a top 50 guy, really coming into the spring, blew up, in competitive play in the spring, and then in I think April and May, and then in June he took part in that prestigious MBPA Top 100 camp and was the MVP out there. Remember, Arkansas's coaches were there. John Calipari was there, and so they had already seen him play a little bit, but now seeing him outside of circuit play, going up against some of the better players in the country, elite players. Malik Thomas had an outstanding event there, by the way, too, in Orlando back in June. But Cen Jr. was so good, he was named the MVP. He, kind of top 50-ish guy that's now top 5 to 10, depending upon the recruiting service. So he's not only a 5-star, but knocking on the door as arguably the number 1 player in the country. And so he released his top 12 today. Arkansas was in that group. There were some other SEC schools. I think Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, and Auburn are the ones that I noticed. Baylor, I think Michigan State. There were some other schools. Obviously, when you have 12, I went through about half of them. So we'll see where that goes. I put an article out, a recruiting article, just focusing on class of 2025. And put that out about 2 weeks ago, the end of July, excuse me. And I went through a lot of these players' names, and I kind of did a cold, warm, or hot where Arkansas stood with everybody. Acuff Jr. had just committed. And then I had Caleb Wilson, Arkansas, the meter for where things stood as far as his interest level in Arkansas was on the hot side. With Koa Peat, I had it warm to hot. So I had it kind of tweening there. I would say anytime now that you know you're getting a guy on campus, you're maybe gravitating a little closer to hot. But because some of my source info has reminded me twice, they still think and have doubled down on the idea that he's going to take these visits, but he thinks he'll probably stick close to home, which probably looks like Arizona if that happens. Is it really hot for Arkansas? Well, again, I say it's John Calipari and the Arkansas Razorbacks. I really like anytime Cal gets this deep with somebody, I like his chances. So maybe it's verging towards hot on that. Again, do you get to Caleb Wilson and Koa Pete? Maybe, maybe not. I would lean toward not. But again, Calipari, you look at his classes where he's had multiple 5 stars. Sometimes they're similar position wise. That's just the way it is. I mean, if you look at DJ Wagner, Rob Dillingham last year, both of those guys 5 stars, both of them potential combo guards. Maybe DJ Wagner a little bit more of closer to a true point guard. I wouldn't claim a true point guard, but maybe closer to being in a lead guard role than you would have thought of Dillingham. But both of them did it, as did Reed Shepard, who went, third overall in the NBA draft and had a great summer league. So Calipari can stack up blue chip players, even similar position wise. I think there are enough differences with Caleb Wilson. They're different kind of players to me. Caleb Wilson, long, he can play the 3, 4, 5. He can defend all of those positions. He's more of a rim protector too than Koa Pete. I think both players can step out a little bit, but it's interesting dynamics. But going back to Cen Jr., I think he's going to play the center spot in college, maybe the 4. They list him as a forward. I think when I've seen him play, and I think maybe he'd slot in as a 5 at Arkansas if you could get him, and we'll see if he sets up visits. He was a guy that he's really getting started in the process. I think his process had been working through, but because he shot up from a top 50-ish guy into that top 5-10 scenario, it opened up more doors for him and more possibilities, because it's thought that maybe he'd stick to a Big East, Big Ten or Big East. Now he's got options coast to coast, Cen Jr. that is. But I find it interesting, Nate Ament, who also, I wouldn't say he shot up the charts as much, but he was sort of a top 15, top 20 guy, and he's moved inside that top 10. Some people have him in the top 3 to 5. But I interviewed him back on the Adidas circuit back in May, and he talked about visiting with Arkansas's new staff already and considering a visit. He mentioned Arkansas among 10 schools. Arkansas's name hasn't been as hot with him lately, so maybe that's something that doesn't quite happen, or we don't learn more on that here in the next few days necessarily. However, a lot of these guys are going to try to really get some visits hammered out. And remember, you're not limited to 5 per year at this point. It used to be you had 5 total, then they expanded it and you could have 5 in your junior year, 5 in your senior year. Now you can take unlimited visits. Unlimited. Most players aren't going to take more than probably a handful, but it has happened and it will happen, and we just never know which players it will happen with. I go back to Jasper Johnson, Arkansas among his top 5. Is he a guy that would ultimately make a decision to compete with a Darius Acuff Jr. for lead guard role? Both of them are kind of alpha mentality when it comes to scoring. I retweeted some highlights that came out over the week with those two guys competing against each other back in the spring and summer. And so thought that, just, looking at those guys go head to head, I started really thinking about how, is there really enough room for both of those guys coming in? Both of them projected or thinking they'd be one and dones, maybe not wanting to compete with those, for minutes there. I think there's enough difference between a Koa Pete and Caleb Wilson where I could see that a little better, even though, again, I would lean maybe towards that won't happen. I wouldn't completely rule it out. And some of the comments are coming over. You guys know I do a poor job on that. All right, we're about 20 minutes in. I'm not going to go deep and long today on this. Isaiah Seeley, the in-state class of 2025, 6'7" guard, wing out of Springdale, national top 50th guy, again, a 4-star. Had a good spring and summer with Team Fad 17U on the Nike circuit. Got to see him play. By the way, I've seen all these guys play in person just the last several months. Interviewed most of them, and so it's the further along we go in their recruitment. I feel like I'm coming from a place of understanding at least what their games are and how they might translate to the next level. Even when you interview guys and they talk about Arkansas being interested, there's only so much you know about their true interest. Proofs in the pudding. Put your money where your mouth is. Schedule a visit and get on campus. So those are things that Jacob Lanier leaving Arkansas to go to Arizona. So I'm reading one of the comments. It was a choice. A lot of Arkansas kids go on to these national independent schools that play the TV schedules, play the best against the best. So it's almost a carryover from your spring and summer playing on the shoe circuit, because you're going to see a lot of the same top level guys playing at these independent schools. Sometimes these Arkansas teams, for the kids that stay in state, they schedule some really good games and are able to enter in some really big events. Even the King Cotton Classic is a strong field. There was a 5-star 2026 5-star that I saw play with a team out of Florida that Arkansas's got an offer out to. Alex Constanza, 6'7" wing, and then J.J. Andrews with Little Rock Christian Academy, also a top 15 5-star that played in that event. So again, but if you look at players leaving the state for high school to be at these independent schools, it's so they can compete in practice against other high level players in their schedule during the season. They think that it helps with their profile and their development. Sometimes I agree that it works, and sometimes not so much. It's like anything else. Sometimes the grass is greener, sometimes it's not. Oftentimes it's not. In basketball, though, I've seen some real progress with guys helping themselves by doing that. Selfishly, I'd like them to stay in Arkansas because, as you know, I cover basketball A to Z in Arkansas. I don't just come on and talk about it, not having seen these kids and what their development is and what they do and the work they put in. And so selfishly, I want to see all of them stick around, but it doesn't quite always work out that way. But getting back to Isaiah Seeley, he took a visit to Ole Miss. Remember, I mentioned August 1st to the 5th was a quiet period, which means players can go on campus. He went to Ole Miss. He's got a visit to St. Louis coming up. He's talking about visiting Cal and Arkansas a little later. And so could he squeeze a visit in at the end of August to Arkansas? Those were some of the days he was talking about doing that. He could even drop in for an unofficial visit if he wanted to, because he's up there in Springdale. That's something he could get worked out if he wanted to, and then maybe later look at it, taking an official visit. So there's some proximity options there for him. Nearly 23 minutes, and I'm going to wrap it up at 25 minutes today. I think this has been, I hope it's been informative. I've kind of jumped around, but you had two pieces of news. I guess the most important one, obviously, is Koa Peat, national top 5-star. And I keep saying national top 10 or top 5. That's who Calipari identifies. Get used to it. Get used to it. He says he's only going to take 3 or 4 in most classes from the high school ranks. This class, to me, I've said it multiple times, 2025 is deep and loaded at the top. If he can get 4 or 5 or 6 of some of these names we've gone through, if he could get that many, I think he'd have to make an exception. And it really wouldn't be an exception based on his track record. It would just be an exception made for his recent talking points. But Koa Pete, the news there, going to visit Arkansas, scheduled now for September 14th. So we'll see. Again, I'm told he'll take in that Arkansas UAB football game. He'll attend basketball practice. That's expected that time of year. That's why he's taking that visit when he is. That may seem like no-brainer stuff, but the real intel that I'm told is that there could be more visits on that date. Now, what I don't know is did him firming up and going public with his visit date push everybody else out? Was it a situation where Arkansas was really looking at having multiple visits in because it's the only window in September to have it bring them in for when a football game is being played and you can get them out there and get around Razorback fans and see that atmosphere? Or was it a first come, first serve? Multiple guys were looking at it. The first guy commits to a visit date, pushes others out. That I don't know. That may be something that's still worked out. Remember, we're just we're not even to August 10th yet, so we're still 5 or so weeks out from when that visit will even happen. But Koa Pete, again, I love this guy's game. I compared him a little bit to Corliss Williamson. I don't normally throw that around. Corliss was just there was Larry Johnson, Corliss Williamson. There's been some other savvy, physical, undersized forwards. You're talking that 6'7", 6'6" to 6'8" range. Koa Pete has been excellent on big stages. Team USA basketball comes to mind, with the junior national team for several years, been a star doing that. The Compton Magic, 17U. I've seen him play so many times over the years in the spring and summer, and I'm always impressed, not just because he knows how to use that frame, but he's added nuance to some of his face-up stuff. He's not a guy that you're like a Nate Ament, who I love, by the way, the one I mentioned earlier, another five-star in that class that's moved inside the top 10. He's not that. But he is a guy that can be physical, play around the basket, and he's got a nice first step facing up. And if you put guys that don't move like he does out on him and he steps out a little bit, he's going to get by him. One thing I notice about this guy, you see transition plays, and we're constantly seeing when you identify a 3-point shooter in a defensive set, guys run out and close harder, or they guard a player more closely and don't leave to help. So you don't think about a guy that attacks the basket and the rim getting that kind of gravity pulling players to the basket, but because you have to stay on him and you're worried about him getting good position and getting a catch, whether it's transition to the half court, Koa Pete, that is, players stay glued to him and they refuse to come. They would rather see a guard penetrate and take their chances of someone helping on that guy, even if he gets all the way to the rim. Because if you leave to help, Koa Pete is going to finish. He's going to get a pass. He's going to either get a lob and dunk it, or he's going to get a quick pass, and there's nothing you can really do with him because he's so good at sealing guys, using his body to get leverage, and then he's got great finishing angles. That's why he reminds me a little bit of Corliss Williamson. So that was part of the big news we talked about here. And then I think just the other piece, just repeating it, Cen Jr., not as significant, also class of 2025, MVP of the MBPA Top 100 camp back in June. Arkansas coaches there. Calipari was there. Arkansas has been on him. That offer, we came on here and talked about it a few episodes ago when he got it. A lot of other schools had kind of already gotten in there, but Arkansas's jumped into the fray. And Arkansas's on his top 12 list. We'll see what to make of that. Just because Caleb Wilson also recently put out a top 12, because I know that Arkansas is in great shape with him, it's a little bit different if you're Arkansas and you have that information looking at 11 other schools on the list. I think with Cen Jr., it's not as certain what may be in play for him. Maybe there's some information out there that I haven't seen. So I'm not trying to say because Arkansas is on the top 12 to really pay heavy attention to that, but I mean, he could have left Arkansas off, and then we're not talking about him anymore. And let's not forget, John Calipari, when it comes to 5 stars, he's identifying the ones that he wants to really pursue. And when you see a top 12 list, you're not really sure where that goes. I can tell you right now, Koa Pete or Caleb Wilson, Calipari wants both of those guys. If he can get one, great. If he can get both, he will. So you heard that here too. All right, 20 minutes in. We're not going to make it to 30. Am I crazy? I'd normally go an hour. We're going to cut it short today. I know it's Friday afternoon, Friday evening. People are ready to wind it up. As always, please go hit share, like, subscribe, anything that helps us out. Once again, thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. Until next time, see you then.